Thank you very much, Don. Very interesting, definitely. Just bringing this back into the context of the conference on climate change, I wanted to ask you, Mr. Jayawira, how to use this, of course, fantastic platform of collaboration and this new generation of high integrity and highly mobilized or potential to mobilize generation. You think that we need a global program of climate literacy so that we could benefit from those technological advancements in climate change, combating climate change?
Okay, thank you. I think these are fascinating developments. I mean, there is no question that the Web 2 provides a lot of opportunities for interactivity, collaboration, networking, and reinforcing our own convictions on climate change and other issues. For me, what is more important in this development is that, because when we look at the new media systems and traditional media systems, and media is for me an institution, whatever technologies you use, what matters is the institutional alignment is very important. Because why? First and foremost, any media, for that matter, has to gather information, then has to verify those information and disseminate those information. These are the three important things that any media could do. New media, as far as the social networking is concerned, to me is not necessarily replace the traditional role of media in gathering, verifying and disseminating information, which is very crucial to what I would call the public sphere discussions on policy development and other things. What I gather from these experiences is that advantage it has over the traditional media system. Now we are creating a kind of dialogic loop between the traditional media and their audiences through these new media systems. That you can see many newspapers are on the web, and blogs, extended blogs from journalists, responses coming from the audiences, the television organizations, the programming directly responses from SMS messages. So I see this development as reinforcing, in a way, the existing media system. This is, for me, this is very, very important. On the other hand, there could be certain limitations if we overemphasize on the networking potentials of the new media, because usually most of the networks are built around convictions and reinforces those convictions. But we need to go beyond those, and there are a lot of people who are not yet really aware of climate change. I mean, for the first time, it was the traditional media which broadcast news items on climate change. That is how people became knowledgeable about what is happening in the world, in the North Pole and rainforest and desertification. All these were news stories by and large. No education system in the developing country, even though they teach more or less geography as a subject, include these climate change aspect as that's why I call that we need a global literacy movement on what I would call climate literacy, and all these elements from new media and traditional media should become partners in this global literacy movement. I also think that more and more these, if you look at the examples, given recent examples, like in the case of Iran and other places, they often use, even I know that there is a very effective disaster preparedness system elaborated after the tsunami in Sri Lanka based on mobile phones, cell phones, using cell phones. All these technological innovations are very efficient in a crisis situation. But unfortunately, climate change is not felt as a crisis as such, because it's happened over the long period of time. So we need to have a consistent literacy program on climate. And this can be done only when we look at the potentials of both new and all media coming into terms, using the technologies and engaging with their audiences. Lastly, I want to highlight one other aspect, of course, this feedback loop facilitated by new media is very important for traditional media. Then of course, there is a question when we look at the particularly in developing countries, of course, I'm not talking very much about the developed countries where the knowledge is available, where there is basic knowledge about climate change, the education system, quality education is there. It is easy to use these tools, but even when you look at the collaborative networks, you have certain limitations. Or even though at the global level, there is an enormous number of people involved in the collaborative networks. At the national level, and more or less, this is, I would say, they are restricted in terms of many constraints. For instance, the language issue in the web. We know, fortunately, that Google has now provided machine translation possibilities in nearly 19 languages, major languages, but we have enormous amount of smaller languages with different type of scripts, particularly nation scripts. Even in Africa, you find a lot of Romanized scripts, which is easy to use in machine translation languages and other web applications. But there's enormous amount of work to be done in multilingualism in cyberspace. That is to prevent the engagement of large number of people. So that is an area that need to have adequate attention, particularly by those who are wishing to promote these tools for knowledge sharing and exchanges. Yes.
Thank you. How do you want to see this? Where do you want to see this program for climate literacy implemented? If you're saying that the collaborative platforms have limitations and education, as you say, traditional education through schools again has its limitations. So how do you achieve this higher level of literacy?
This is again a question of who is going to do that. I have a very interesting email just received by me. I'm involving in a kind of a network with some of my Indian colleagues about using mobile technologies, mobile cell phone technologies for e-governance in India. What he says, I will just quote from that email which I received today. Before mobile telephony are actually the strengths of the electronic media, especially radio, larger scale outreach, local language content, insignificant cost for user and no particular requirement for special workforce. So the emphasis is who is going to do this? Requirement for a special workforce. I would tend to think, because we do a lot of work with the traditional media, and for us the new media is a kind of an extension to the traditional media. If you look at the global situation, particularly in the developing countries, if you look at the content of newspapers and vernacular language media, there are hardly any content on what we could call science journalism. Why? Because many developing country journalists have very little understanding about asking right questions when it comes to the sustainable issues involving climate change, the energy, biodiversity, all these issues. So we need to look at we need to have a parallel effort investing in journalism education. So journalists can ask this question. I believe still we need to go back to the public service remit of media to re-emphasize that this is a crisis, a planetary crisis. There are enormous number of government broadcasting organizations which receive public funds, and they need to take these